Welcome to Floating Questions, the podcast where curiosity leads, we follow, and stories unfold. My name's Ray, simply asking questions. Shall we begin? Today on Floating Questions, I am joined by Stephanie Franklin. Stephanie is the Deputy Associate Commissioner of Strategy and Analytics at the Texas Education Agency, TEA, where she applies a sharp analytical mind to one of the most complex and essential systems in the US, public education. Before joining TEA, Stephanie spent several years at BCG and holds degrees from both MIT and Harvard. Beyond her impressive credentials, Stephanie is someone who cares deeply about building effective teams and empowering women in leadership. I am so excited to have this conversation with her today. And before we dive into chat, I want to note that Stephanie is speaking in a personal capacity. Her views are her own and not representative of the agency or any professional role. Hi, Stephanie. How are you today? Welcome.
Hello. I am good. It's lovely to see you. Thank you for having me.
Let's just first maybe unwind your journey a little bit and go back to BCG. BCG stands for Boston Consulting Group. It's one of the most well-known established consulting agencies out there in the world. So what made you want to pivot out of that world?
Yeah, well, first I'll say I think consulting, it was where I started my career. And I think it is a phenomenal way on an individual level to start your career. I really enjoy being a generalist, getting to grapple with a wide range of problems and use a wide range of methods and tools. And I think the nature of consulting really lends itself well to that. And in the relatively short amount of time that I was in the consulting world, I feel like I just learned a ton. Very, very grateful for that experience. I don't know if I would consider it a pivot into what I'm doing now so much as just kind of the natural next step in my career journey. I've always been passionate about public service from just outside of Washington, D.C. And so growing up, I had a lot of role models who were unsurprisingly passionate about public service, both in my own family and beyond. And it just feels natural to me to solve problems that matter. That meant going into education when in 2021, when the pandemic had caused just tragic learning loss. And it's not the only space I'm passionate about, but it definitely is a space that I'm deeply passionate about, where I saw an opportunity to use my skills in both strategy and analytics for a mission that I deeply care about.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I mean, education is just one of those foundational pillars for any nation, right? And I feel like a lot of issues probably in the United States stem all the way back from the education system, how it's designed, how the students are learning, what kind of materials are, taught to the students. So it's definitely a very difficult and foundational space to be in. Are there any big surprises going from the private sector into the public sector, or you already have some type of expectation when you are going into the education agency?
The natural expectation you'd have going from private sector to public sector is that things are more bureaucratic, as you named in the intro as well. And so I don't know that was a surprise. I think it was an expectation I had going in, and I was actually very pleasantly surprised by how strategic and data driven the culture was before I even got there. And I credit that to a lot of the other phenomenal leaders that I work with who have really kind of pushed the agency in a really outcomes oriented direction. It's not a coincidence that's why they also created my role and hired me, is because they care about those types of things. And so I think maybe I actually overshot in my expectations or concerns for what government would look like, and then was very pleasantly surprised in a lot of ways with how aligned I was with the folks that I worked with.
Wow, that's really interesting. I'm gonna have a lot more questions about, using analytics to empower the education agency a little bit later. But before we get to that point, was there a moment when you knew public service was going to stick for you? Or perhaps is it sticking?
Is it sticking is a great question. I definitely am passionate about my work right now. I am planning to see the work that I am doing now through to whatever the finish line looks like for that. And I want to continue in my career, kind of doing how I framed it before, is solving problems that matter to me. I think I am continually reevaluating what the best way to have an impact is. I hope that that continues to be government, and I also think that there are other paths for what that could look like, and so I think the goal remains the same. The question of what's the best way to get there is something that I'm continuing to turn over in my mind.
Maybe let's first talk a little bit about your role. You're the Deputy Associate Commissioner of Strategy and Analytics at the TEA. What does this position really entail? What do you do on a daily basis?
Yeah, my role is really kind of centrally positioned within the agency to support all of the different channels of what the agency does. So I guess I'll start with my role, which is I have a team that does analytics support for our program teams. I have a team that does technology support for our program teams. And then I have a team that supports with strategic planning and performance management. And so this is the team that really is owning the execution of and management to our agency's strategic plan. And so I think then the question is, well, what is that strategic plan? What are all the places that you are supporting with data technology and strategy? There's 5 pillars of our strategic plan, or I should say 6 pillars. And so we do actionable goal setting is one of the pillars. So that's accountability and reporting, the state summative assessment, and the accountability systems by which we hold districts accountable to outcomes. And so I think that is kind of foundational and underpins a lot of the other supports. And I should name there's roughly 1,200 independent school districts in the state of Texas. So we
Wow.
don't directly administer any educational programming. We administer supports and oversight to school systems to allow them to operate as effectively as possible. So actionable goal setting, setting high bars for them and holding them accountable to it. Then another pillar is ready students. So that is special education support, school safety, early childhood education, making sure that kids have all of the supports they need to show up to school ready to learn. Then we have a pillar that is called rigorous engagement. So that is what content is taught in school, setting the right curriculum standards, promoting the right instructional materials, and then providing the right supports to teachers to teach rigorous grade level content well, including training on the science of reading, on the right way to do math instruction, etc. And then we have supported educators. So, in addition to ensuring that our kids show up to school ready to learn, we also want to ensure that our teachers show up to school ready to teach. And so we have, strategic compensation, other supports for educators to ensure that they are supported and able to teach as effectively as possible. And then my work really falls into the last 2 pillars of our strategic plan, which are aligned systems and continuous improvement. And so aligned systems means we're going to do all of the above in an aligned and not scattered and not siloed way, both from a framework perspective, making sure that we have a coherent framework for what it means to be an effective school and effective district. From a technology standpoint, this is where a lot of my work lands. So we're not just standing up a bunch of different technology systems that don't talk to each other. We're making sure that everything is interoperable and connected. We are making sure that you don't have to submit like 7 different grant applications throughout the year with different pieces of the same information. We can streamline those processes, etc. And then continuous improvement is where we are looking internally as an agency using data and rigorous goals to continually evaluate the outcomes of our work and make sure that it's improving. And so that is really where my team focuses a lot of our effort and ensuring all of the things that I just mentioned are really achieving their goals and that we're improving them when they're not.
Wow. Thank you so much for such a clear explanation. It opens up the door for me to ask a lot of questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
um, well, first of all, it sounds like you were leading basically 3 separate teams, which is huge. And how many people in total on those 3 teams?
Yeah, well, I think my job is to make them not separate. But yes, we're 20 something in total, so sizable, but not massive.
How do you even making sure everyone is really doing the things in the right direction?
Yeah, great question. This is the kind of learning journey that I have been on. Well, in addition to drinking from the fire hose on all things education over the last few years, I've also been, I think, drinking from the fire hose on all things leadership. I am early on in my leadership journey, but very passionate about it. And I think now, with the scale of the team that I have now, it is about managing through layers, right? I have all of my direct reports are supervisors. And so I'm establishing the right structures and the right supports for my leadership team to make sure that then they can lead their team as effectively as possible. So it's definitely a different orientation. You definitely have to kind of fight that instinct to do everything yourself and really, really focus on the people on your team because that's the most important piece.
We can dive into that when we talk about how do you work very effectively in this system. The pillar 5 and 6 align systems and continuous improvement. A lot of it's about making sure the agency is as efficient as possible. But the more interesting part for me is how do you even leverage the analytics to really improve the outcomes of the first 4 pillars? They sound great. I'm just curious about the mechanism and the innovations that you have been leading there.
Yeah. So to name some examples of projects that my team works on, because there's 1,200 different districts in Texas, we have to do a lot of district level analysis to really help us understand, de-average outcomes to understand which districts are struggling and which districts are excelling. And so, for example, we've done an analysis to try to understand pre-K enrollment gaps. Where are the places where there's the most kids who are eligible for free pre-K but are not being served right now, not being enrolled, so we can target our outreach in the early childhood education space. And that includes some demographic forecasting because we only know who we're serving. We don't know who we're missing. We do a lot of work kind of on the more operational side of things to just track the right short term metrics to ensure our program teams are delivering things effectively. So, ensuring that curriculum materials are showing up on time, ensuring that our vendors are delivering us error free content, and if it is not error free, making sure we're tracking the in real time and holding them accountable. We did an analysis that was looking at uh, work plan data from one of our trickier projects from a timeline perspective to understand what were the biggest causes of delay when you have a project you're trying to get over the finish line that just involves a lot of complex stakeholders, and what were the bottlenecks, what were the main pain points that we can understand to improve the process for the next time. So that's really on the operational side of things. And then we also do more long-term program evaluations. So understanding, are our curriculum instruction efforts really actually translating into improved student outcomes? Because at the end of the day, that's what matters the most. And can we understand what is having the biggest impact on student outcomes? That piece is both critically important and really challenging because of the time scales involved, because of the fact that it's really hard to isolate the effect of any inputs compared to the effect of the pandemic, which has been a factor 100% of the time that I've been working in education. But I think we're going to keep at it because that is, at the end of the day, is what matters the most.
Yeah. Well, first of all, there are so many diverse types of problems that it sounds like you were trying to solve. The thing that stood out to me the most is that it implies a long term tracking, right? Even measuring the outcome or even understand, if you make a change, maybe it doesn't show up a few years later. So there needs to be some level of continuity. How does the agency or how are you building a system that makes sure that that level of consistency is achieved? And are you mostly acting on projects insights that come out of the research maybe from a couple of years ago instead of like the projects that are you're starting right now because you simply just need to wait a lot of time to get to the results?
Yeah, Great question. I think that is a foundational challenge that we deal with. Uh, and I don't know if I have the like silver bullet answer, but I think we try to navigate that challenge from a few different angles. One is figuring out what the right leading indicators are that you will know about sooner. So if you're, well, this is not a hypothetical, this is a real example. If we are doing training for teachers in Texas to train them in research based practices, the science of teaching and reading, to help them become better literacy instructors. Building Teaching a kid to read, building foundational literacy skills takes several years. So you train a kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade teacher, and the kid goes through kindergarten, first, second, third grade. It's 4 years before you. In third grade is the first point at which we have statewide literacy testing, and that's the first year that you'll know are those kids' literacy skills improving. So we're going to do that analysis. We are doing that analysis, but in the short term, you also need to know, uh, can we collect data in the classroom to know, well, can we observe that the teachers are practicing some of the skills that we think are best practices? We're certainly monitoring, are they mastering the tests that we give them in this training? And then the next step is, are they are they teaching effectively in the classroom? And that in itself is not proving that the kids can read, but it's certainly an important first step. So that's one piece of it, is what are the early indicators you can look at. I think also part of it is just you need both robust small scale trials, and you need to measure impact at scale. So a lot of what we're doing, we're the scale, right? So we're rolling out things that have already been proven out in the research to be effective through smaller randomized controlled trials, and then we want to monitor that it is going to have the impact that we think it will in the long run, but we already have a strong hypothesis that it will because we grounded our strategy in research from the first place.
Wow. I like the part that you were trying to tease out, not just like, hey, we think that this new plan or this new strategy would actually improve the outcome of the students' learning, but also we need to tease out the confounding factor of, are the teachers actually following the script the way that we taught them? How do you really measure that early indicators? But how do you find those early indicators? What are the early indicators that you find to be effective versus ineffective?
Yeah. Some of this, by the way, is work we're still in the process of standing up, and so I'd say ask me again in a year or two. But I think part of it also is where the critically important piece is not just throwing data nerds at the problem, but really having the data nerds work together with education experts. I can call up my colleagues who are experts in literacy instruction, and we can work together on a rubric that says what are the like 5 practices that you really would want to see a teacher doing, and how can we measure those in a data driven way. And that takes multiple folks at the table to get to, from an expert perspective on instructional practices, what are the practices we want to see? And then from a data perspective, how can we make that a rigorous measurement instrument?
Can you give me a specific example for how you convert that expert opinion into a specific metric?
Yeah, simple stuff like, are the kids engaged? Or is the teacher teaching grade level content? Is the teacher getting the letter sounds right when they're teaching phonics? There are like various things that like our literacy experts will tell us that you want to see. And then what my team is trying to do is not rocket science, but like we're supporting with, okay, how can we get all of our different teams using similar rubrics with similar scaling, with data infrastructure that rolls things up in similar ways so that everybody's like it, whether it's a 0 to 5 scale or a 0 to 3 scale, we're using similar ways of translating those rubrics into data.
I see. But how do you even measure engagement?
There is kind of inherent subjectivity that is never going to go away, but the way you do it is you have third party experts who are able to go into classrooms and make a judgment call on a rubric. And then you do inter-rater reliability to ensure that those folks are evaluating in similar ways. And so you kind of run the numbers on the back end to make sure that your evaluators are calibrated.
Gotcha. So the way that you really check that metric is by sending experts to random, let's say, school district and select a few schools, do random sampling, and then try to understand what's going on. So back in undergrad, I did a research project. And the professor is at the intersection of like computer science and also education, actually. Um, what the project was, a lot of undergrads, they fail engineering classes a lot of times. And so the after class sessions become really critical when TA, teaching assistants, are there. And when they're in that after class sessions, they would be given tablets. And then you would track the data from the tablets. For example, how they are scrolling through the screen, how they're working through the problem sets together to try to assess whether they are actually engaged so that if we predict that this group potentially is not really moving forward, you would want to send a notification to the TA to say, hey, maybe you want to check in this group because it doesn't seem like they're super engaged. I thought that concept was really interesting. I wonder whether the education agency would consider such type of like practice.
Okay. Um, it's a great question. If I'm understanding the question right, it's essentially like, can we track things like student engagement in more digital or tech driven ways? And I think the answer is sort of. But this is probably one of the places where we have to be a little bit more conservative at the state level with our scale, because I think that there are concerns about student privacy, and I think that they're valid concerns, right? So a lot of the work that we're doing right now is very print focused, very kind of more traditional from a tech standpoint. Not all of it, but a good bit of it, and I think that we need to be cautious and measured when we think about where we're tracking student data at the state level. So there are things that are easier to do first in smaller pilots before you roll it out statewide. We are doing some work with blended learning. We have a blended learning grant program where we provide grants to districts to incorporate technology into their instructional practices, and we measure outcomes for that as well. But we don't really like track students at a very granular level.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Well, it also depends on what kind of data that you collect, right? With the example that I was given, if you're collecting how they really scroll through this screen on the tablet, that type of data is a lot less invasive than, let's say, have a camera in the classroom and then using the computer vision to really detect, oh, are they talking to each other? Those are two types of different privacy requirement and problems. Are there like specific areas or specific data points that you think is on the cusp of, you are able to really collect and potentially make a meaningful step change versus, I understand there are some a little bit more moonshots ideas.
I think of it in a couple of ways. One, I think we're pretty far from what you're describing. I think there's a lot of really foundational things we have to get right. Nor do I think that the direction is ever necessarily the state government having a role in anything that you're describing, because there's a difference between it's just a good thing to do and there's a good thing for the state government to do. And I agree that there's a spectrum of ways in which you could track student data. The level of tracking of individual students, or the level of focusing on individual students that an individual teacher needs to do, that's very different from what the state needs to do, because informing on the fly changes in instructional practices of this kid needs more focus on this concept, this kid, I need to redeliver this lesson, I need to
Uh,
like intervene with this set of kids, is a very different set of decisions that you're informing versus like wide scale policy, we need to improve this thing at the state level. And so the ways that you would use that information differ at different levels of scale. And so that I think we need to keep focusing on at the state level is what is our role versus the role of an individual teacher.
I love this angle that you're bringing up. That totally makes sense. I know that we talk a little bit about how education policy change often is a very long tail one because you just need a lot of time to even observe, measure, and understand the impact. But are there projects that are fairly short term and pretty quick turnaround and that was not within your expectation? Because in the beginning of the session, you also mentioned that you were pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, I think the piece that I don't even know if it's pleasantly surprised. The piece that I was surprised by was my role was new when I came in, and when my job title was director of analytics. And so I was, kind of understood that my goal was to stand up new data projects where we hadn't had data projects before. And I guess I anticipated some resistance to that because in the consulting world, there's often understandable resistance to like, why are you trying to change the way that I'm doing things? I don't need this. I actually kind of found the opposite of, I think education is just inherently very data driven because a lot of the things that you described are happening at the classroom level. Like teachers are regularly assessing their students and using that data to inform instructional choices. There's actually like a proliferation of data in education right now, and I think a lot of the time my role has been like, hold up, let's simplify. Like we don't have to do everything. We don't have to send out a 50 question survey. Maybe a 5 question survey is sufficient. We don't have to track 10 different metrics. Let's like streamline and focus on the 4 outcomes that we care about the most. And I think that is also one of my like professional strengths is simplifying complexity. So I think that is the more coherent answer to what I was starting to say before, as far as what has surprised me coming in is actually people wanting to use data in some cases, I think a little bit too much, and really just needing that strategic alignment.
Well, I would love to, get an example from you for how you think through where to simplify.
Yeah. I'll give you an example from some of our curriculum and instruction work. Because of some legislation the past 2 years ago, the state is now a textbook publisher. So we actually publish open education resources that are freely available to school systems in the state of Texas, with also additional like funding supports for them to print them, etc. We need to stand up new processes to internally monitor how well we are doing in our new role as a publisher. And I sat down with the folks on that team because I think they just had a lot of complexity in terms of the metrics that they were looking at to evaluate their work in that conversation. At the end of the day, there's really 3 things that they need to make sure they're doing: making high quality materials, make sure they're delivering them on time, make sure that they are effectively engaging with all of the stakeholders that they need to throughout that process. And so we can kind of categorize a lot of the things that they were looking at into those 3 categories and then really streamline, okay, here's the rubric we're going to use to measure whether the product is high quality. Here is the metric we're going to use to evaluate whether we're delivering on time. And here's the like 1 or 2 feedback mechanisms we're going to really look at to understand, are we managing our stakeholders well? And that is so much like, you got to get clear on that strategy and why are you looking at the information that you're looking at so that it can actually be actionable and inform your action. And so that streamlining really helps us look at things in clearer ways to get to the crux of how are we doing and where do we need to improve.
So essentially, you are lending them a way of thinking, a framework, so that they can stick different metric sticker to the pillar and framework outlines that you give to them. Um, how do you arrive at that framework or distilling the job function into a few very basic categories? Do you usually discover this in a conversation with them, or do you usually think ahead of time?
I think a huge part of my job is listening and learning. I've been very self aware the whole time that I've been in this role that I don't come from an education background, unlike a lot of my colleagues. And so my role is not to be the education expert. My role is to learn from the education experts and help them be more effective at their jobs. So I try to be intentional with, where I'm attending meetings to build context and then ask a lot of questions. And then a lot of it is just learning from folks and then helping them to collect their thoughts into strategy and scoping out projects that would help them.
I love this. Before I go into the next topic, can you give me an example where maybe some of the analytics insights really shaped some of the strategy or policy around the education?
Some of the analytics work that we do that I'm most excited about, it's not necessarily the most naturally exciting topic. And in fact, it is one of the more controversial topics where people are not always happy with us. But I think it is just so directly actionable and impactful is our work around the state accountability system. So we one of the things we do at the state level is we not only administer an annual summative assessment to understand our kids learning what we want them to, but we actually have a system where we use that information as well as some college and career readiness information, some student growth information, various data points to hold districts and campuses accountable, and we rate them on an A through F scale of how well they are teaching kids. And right, obviously that is not the most popular thing that we do, but there's a solid research base out there that shows that at the end of the day helps improve low performing schools and ultimately improve outcomes for kids. You have to hold the adults accountable to help the kids. And what we do on the analytics side is we do a lot of like really robust analysis. It's very detailed and in the weeds because there's a lot of nuance that you have to get right when designing this system to understand what really are the indicators that are the most important to hold schools accountable for, and how do you structure that in the way that makes the most sense. And we want to like really understand the impact of any change that we're making to this system in detail. So a lot of just kind of modeling out what that change might look like. And like this is again where it's tough because of data lags, et cetera. But you want to look at like what are the career or college readiness credentials that a student could earn in high school, and what are the ones that most translate into post-secondary success in either college or the workforce or the military. And like really doing rigorous research there helps us understand then what we should be holding schools accountable for doing in high school and what actually matters and what doesn't matter as much. So that's one example. I'm really excited about that work because it's so clearly working backwards from a very specific policy decision that matters. And so it's exactly the place where we should be doing robust data analysis to make sure that we're making the right choice.
I love it seems like you have a very strong clarity on where you really need to emphasize on the accuracy of the research versus what are the things that you could potentially let go and simplify, based on especially based on your previous answer as well. Um,
That's a really good point.
Sweet.
Yeah. You have to be intentional about where the precision matters and where you might be able to go a little more big picture. And accountability is the place where precision really matters.
Um, is there cross-agency learning, like, happening? Because it sounds like you guys are doing a great job, and I wonder whether that type of, like, system would be modeled after by other states' agencies.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think at the end of the day, our mission is improving outcomes for kids in Texas. And so that is what we are very laser focused on. We do some collaboration with other agencies in Texas that also have a hand in shaping outcomes for kids, uh, like Health and Human Services or the Texas Workforce Commission. But yeah, I don't know if I have a clear answer to your question. There's an important distinction that is uh, complicated to navigate between policy and execution, where we implement laws, but at the end of the day, it was the Texas legislature that designed our accountability system, and then we figure out the details and administer it. But some of it is actually policy that is not driven by my agency, but is driven by the legislature, and then we receive that policy and we implement it.
Right. But regardless what's the specific policy content, the system that you built to implement the accountability to uphold such policies, if there is a tech world version for that, I would just package that into an app and help other agencies implement similar tracking system.
Yep. And like when you get into differences in state policy, that's when technology solutions become a lot harder to scale across states. So we're doing a lot of
Uh,
technology work that is very Texas specific. But some of the data interoperability we're doing, which is based on the EdFi data standard, is something that is cross state. And so I am excited about some of these solutions where we can build kind of foundational technology systems that can work in multiple different state contexts. It's hard, but like slowly there are places where we're moving in that direction.
yeah, I totally understand the importance of data connectivity, right? Because even within the company, I am also advocating a lot for that type of data connectivity, but also data reliability, so that you can actually have meaningful views into different parts of the organization, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's just so difficult.
Yep, I completely agree. A challenge to your point of like, how do you show people this is important is I think in education, we need to keep grounding it. Well, this is a generalizable comment about technology. You need to keep grounding in the use cases. And in education, I think the reason I'm so excited about our data interoperability work, it doesn't sound sexy and exciting, but I'd say the thing I work on that has the most direct through line to making educators' lives easier. I think a lot of the stuff that we're doing, um, to some extent, is in the short term putting more work on teachers' plates. We try to mitigate that, but like you're asking a teacher to do a new training, you're asking them to adopt a new curriculum, like that's hard, and we hope that it pays off in the long run, but that's hard. The the data interoperability work is just so directly solving a pain point that folks on my team have heard from so many educators, which I didn't even realize the extent of this problem before coming to the agency because I was an adult who didn't work in schools and didn't have kids. But the proliferation of ed tech over the last, call it, decade, and especially since the pandemic, has just been so profound that so many folks who are working in schools now just see their job as spreadsheets. They're just constantly like pulling things out of one system, combining it with something from another system, taking their grades in one system and entering them into another system because there's just so many more systems now, but there hasn't been the foundational work to get them to interoperate with one another. And so I see this work at the end of the day as taking workload off of educators' plates. And if we can keep grounding it back in that, I think that is how we keep the momentum and keep focus on what matters.
The next topic that I have in mind is about, work within a giant bureaucracy. What makes someone effective and ineffective in a slow moving system with lots of constraints like the one that you're operating in?
Yeah. And it's interesting because in some ways what I'm my organization now is more bureaucratic than where I was coming from, and in some ways it's less. Ultimately, I'm working for a smaller organization than places where I have worked in the past with tens of thousands of employees, where it's really easy to develop silos and duplication of effort and organizational complexity. We are, call it, roughly 1,000 employees, so significantly smaller. It is easier to figure out who's doing what and figure out who you need to talk to about what. So that actually has been, um, in some ways, easier. And I think there the solution to operating effectively is relationship building and really like building up an understanding of who works on what and who you need to work with for what. I think this is where I am a little bit more in awe of the complexity at the federal level where things are much bigger, but I don't have direct experience with that. The place that government definitely is bureaucratic is in the like regulatory constraints on what you can do, particularly when it comes to things like procurement, hiring. With technology work, that can be really hard because procurement policy a lot of the time hasn't kept up with advances in technology. And so you have these like processes that were designed for procuring physical servers that now you're trying to apply to cloud infrastructure, and it just doesn't fit. And like the processes are changing, are evolving to keep up with modern technology, but slowly. And so that can be really painful sometimes. I don't have a fully formed point of view yet on everything that needs to happen to make it easier, but it is a problem that I'm really passionate about solving because enabling government to do technology well is super important. There's a phenomenal book that I recommend anyone who is at all interested in government and or technology read. It's called Recoding America by Jennifer Polka. She articulates this far better than I can. And one of the points she makes is this: we don't focus enough on execution. We focus a lot on policy, and delivery sometimes falls by the wayside. And that is how you end up with things like you have to interact with government. You see it, whether it is applying for a visa, filing your taxes, trying to enroll in government services. Like all of those things are so painful, but from the process standpoint and a technology standpoint. And all of those things are happening digitally now. And so, like, strong technology systems are crucial to making those systems work, and it erodes, understandably erodes, trust and faith in government every time we do one of those things badly, and it also prevents critical systems from working. Jennifer Polka She was part of the group that saved healthcare.gov when the Affordable Care Act was passed. Obviously, like very impactful, very foundational healthcare policy, but it almost completely fell apart because the website didn't work and the website crashed as soon as it took effect. And they had to bring in this, SWAT team of tech nerds to save it. And that's exactly the sort of thing that we need to get better at preventing by putting equal focus on the execution as we do the policy. In Texas, similarly, like we administer the state standardized assessment, and a few years ago there was a tech outage. A bunch of kids couldn't take their tests because the platform didn't hold the load. And so now we so rigorously make sure that we are load testing the platform. We hold our vendors to very high bars for performance, and we focus the heck out of the technology systems because best laid plans go awry if your technology doesn't hold up to what you're trying to roll out. We're a publisher now, and so we need to not only write a really strong curriculum, we also need to make sure that both the digital and the physical experience of receiving that curriculum is strong. So my team is working on improving the user experience for the digital access to our curriculum. You need to have really strong operational management, the right metrics to look at to ensure that we're delivering print to schools on time, or else they won't, you can produce the best possible curriculum in the world, and if they can't actually get it in classrooms by the time the school year starts, it's not going to work.
This is a fantastic point. I actually want to reflect this back to you, which is in the very beginning of our conversation, I asked you, is it sticking? Meaning this working at a education agency sticking for you? And they were continuously evaluating how you could make the most impact on the most important problems. And it sounds like in the bits that you just shared with me right now, you are very passionate about how to enabling government with the technology because that will unlock a lot of other things, and then making sure the execution is actually done correctly. I think that
Yep.
at least that will be the theme, and I don't know, maybe in a few years that's the direction that you're going, or sooner than that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I am I think you can tell like really, really passionate about this. I just see such a glaring problem in so many places that we absolutely need to fix. Which is why I'm continually reevaluating like, can we solve this problem? How can we solve this problem? Is you need top level leadership to care about this problem. And I think right, we have that right now at our agency. Top level leadership is pushing the agency in a direction of caring about outcomes, caring about delivery. It takes a lot of people to make that choice over and over and over again in so many different places.
I also know that you are really passionate about female leadership. Um, what's shaping your view of the years, and what do you really care about in terms of female leadership?
Yeah. This is another topic that excites me a lot. The last few years, I went from working in a male dominated space to working in a female dominated space. Unsurprisingly, education is very female dominated. A lot of women are teachers, and a lot of teachers then go on to roles in education management. And so I work with a whole bunch of phenomenal women. I mean, I don't exclusively work with women. I also work with some phenomenal men. I worked with some great women in my old job too, but the scales definitely tipped when I moved to working in education. And it has been really cool to see and like kind of come up in my own leadership journey in a context where I have a lot of models to look to for what effective leadership looks like in a way that is not inauthentic as a woman. The obvious caveat here is I am generalizing, and obviously there's also a lot of men who are phenomenal leaders, and there's plenty of women who are crappy leaders. But it wasn't until my current role that I really saw modeled at the highest levels of leadership that it is
Mm.
not incompatible to care about people as a human and still set very high expectations and make tough choices when you need to. One of the leadership skills that I learned over the last few years is empathy. I think empathy is a critically important leadership skill, and it's not that men aren't empathetic, but I think that women are often like conditioned to naturally be very empathetic. Leadership is about people, and you need to spend your time thinking not just about systems and processes and numbers, but also about the people on your team and the stakeholders you're interacting with as humans. I think you will be so much more effective as a leader if you are emotionally intelligent, if you lead with empathy and trying to understand other people's motivations, what makes them tick. That is not inconsistent at all with setting high expectations. If we miss the mark on something, if we miss a deadline on a project, I'm going to do the work to really dig in and understand why and how I can really truly help us do better in the future. And that involves like really doing the thought process of, do we miss the deadline because this member of the team really struggles with project management skills and needs new systems for project management, or did we miss the deadline because we were misaligned on expectations and we need to set more clear expectations up front? Or you have to actually, it's not just about saying this was no good, go fix it. It is about understanding really truly what the needs of your team are and coaching folks to improve for the next time around. And similarly, when I'm navigating disagreements with folks, I think it is so important to first take the step to understand where people are coming from and why you disagree. And that doesn't mean you can't continue to disagree, but I think that helps to, one, open your mind to places where you actually could have been wrong. Two, it helps to almost de-escalate the disagreement from an emotional standpoint, because you can go to someone and say, well, I completely understand why you're feeling the way you feel, but still hold firm to, but respectfully, I disagree, and here's why. And I think that is really what good leadership looks like. And again, it is not just about gender, but I do think that that empathy that I've seen modeled by a lot of women.
I see. And you're seeing this pattern because you're switching to a female dominant field.
Yeah, and I don't mean to dismiss some of my amazing female mentors in the consulting world, because again, it's not that cut and dry. But 100%, yes. I've seen more of that just acceptance of modeling empathy and vulnerability in the education world than I have in the consulting world. And I've seen a path to a leadership style I didn't think was possible for myself, that is more authentic to my true self without at all sacrificing outcomes for my team.
Yeah. I'm sure some of this is biological and evolutionary driven reasons, but I think also a lot of it is societal constructs for a long time that's being taught to the kids, right? So then this goes back to education again. How do you really teach kids, both, boys and girls, for how you really understand your own emotions and others' emotions and accept them and then be okay with all kind of emotions present at the same time? That's often not really being talked about maybe in school, at least not that I am aware of for the education system that I grew up with. But do you see such curriculum going forward?
Oh, it's a good question. That's not at all where my mind focuses, which is more like, how do we set up organizational structures and coach up more leaders as adults in the work setting to implement strong leadership practices.
This could be the last episode of Floating Questions, or it may not be. Either way, I hope you enjoyed flowing along with us today. If you liked our journey, please consider subscribing. Thank you for listening, and may the questions always be with you.